Form over function, function over form. One of the frequently discussed topics on watch forums, be it for their dive watch or the pilot watch, the core essence being watches are tools for timekeeping and for specific professional capabilities. And while there are brands that have tried to sort of bridge the gap a little bit, there are a few watches that have boldly gone the other way and sort of prioritized form over function. The Louis Erard regulator made in partnership with the Swiss architecture and design firm Atelier Oy. And this was released last year as a limited edition of, I believe, 178. You can see without me having to explain too much that the goal of this watch was to create an architectural design and vibe to the watch itself and let that be the talking point. So to begin with, this is a 42mm case, fairly modern size. There is not much of a bezel. You see a small polished ring on the top, so it does wear like a 42mm watch. The lug to lug is just shy of 50mm, so it is quite wearable. As you can see, the lugs taper down quite sharply, and I would say this is more wrist friendly than the specs indicate. The thickness is just a tad above 12mm, which is not too bad. It does have a visual heft to it. It does not come off as a slim watch. The lug width is 22mm, which is a relief. I'm glad that they didn't go with 23 or 21. Being 22 gives you a lot of flexibility. As you can see, I already have a fossil strap on it, which I find a little slimmer, and I like the stone texture on this. Compared to the sort of suede grey original strap that came with it, was kind of similar in vibe. This has a little more of a stone texture to it, which I kind of liked. Moving on to the star of the show, the dial. The goal of this dial was to let sort of light radiate out of the center and have this almost laser like effect, and you really have to take a look at this in varying light conditions and see it in person to truly appreciate the design of the dial here. If you were to simply hold it at a flat angle where you don't get much light onto the dial, it looks fairly simple. It looks like this matte gray dial with lines on it. The moment you have a light source, you can quickly see the way that these etched sort of polished lines really shoot out light outwards. It's extremely unique. I've hardly seen a watch with a dial that can radiate this much personality. What really tipped me over the edge to actually pick this up was when I found out that there was actually a logical design to this. And initially I thought it was basically two halves, right? You have the left semicircle and the right semicircle, and it's just these lines that are radiating out from the bottom subdial and this side, and the top subdial on the other side. If you look a little closer, you will notice that there are actually 60-minute indices as such around the dial, and they're equally spaced to represent sort of the minute markings, and every fifth line is actually thicker, and so you do have the 5, 10, 15 markers. And even though there is a sense of asymmetry between the left half and the right half, if you were to observe a little closer, you will see that there's properly spaced 5-minute intervals with minute markers all across the dial. And this makes sense even more so is because it's a regulator, where the goal of a regulator watch is to have timekeeping separated out, the hour subdial on the top and the minute hand all the way on the outer rim, and then the running seconds on the bottom. If you were to look at just the minute hand here and with reference to the 12 as you're wearing it, and use the 5 minutes and use the minute indices, it's while it's a bit tough argument to say that it's easy to tell time, it actually makes sense, is a more valid statement, and there is a logic to the design of the watch. And I really appreciated that while the aesthetic and design aspect was prioritized, they still had a logic to the design, and there was a function tied to the form. The other thing you'll notice is that the hands are blued, which is a very nice touch, and they do catch this lovely blue light. If I have to criticize this watch, I would say that I wish the hands were a little thicker. Now I can see if I had to guess why they did what they did, is the minute sort of the lines that radiate out. I think the hands sort of are the same thickness as those hands, but I would have liked for it to be a little thicker, and that would have made it a little easier to tell time upon a glance. And I am getting used to being able to tell time with the regulator. Definitely be the movement. First of all, I find there is no reason to have a standard grade Celita movement being displayed on a case back. I would have preferred a solid case back with maybe their logo, or another maybe a small etched design piece. In this case, it's very basic 38-hour Celita movement. It's their standard regulator movement. And so Louis Rad has been around, especially after their early 2000s. They've been making a lot of regulator style watches, and they've sort of made a name for themselves for that. They did have a bit of a slump in the middle, but off late they are coming out with a lot of great partnerships with artists and designers, and I think they found a very unique niche here, and I'm really looking forward to what they come up with next. Their Alan Silberstein watches are very quirky and interesting, and while the price point is a little high for what you get from a value standpoint, it's an all polished watch, decent polishing, decent finishing, standard grade movement, but it sits at almost close to $4,000, and considering it's a limited of 178, it might justify it for the kind of unique aesthetic it has, but it does sit a little bit higher on the price tier. However, if you were to look at it from a watch enthusiast perspective, I think every collection should have at least one purely form over function watch, where it's quirky, it's unique, it's just not going to be like anything else in your collection. As much as you can argue a Tudor looks different from a Rolex, looks different from an Omega, a dive watch is fundamentally a dive watch, and a pilot watch is fundamentally a pilot watch, right? Whereas something like this cannot really be compared with and put alongside any of your other watches, and it's going to sit by itself. Is it a dress watch? Is it a sports watch? Is it a casual watch? It is watchmaking for the sake of design and aesthetics, and making something unique, and that in itself is an appealing aspect to it, and that's why I picked it up, and I'm glad I did. I'm quite happy with it. So that is my quick overview on the Louis Erard Regulator limited edition in partnership with the Atelier Oy. If you have any additional questions, let me know, and thanks for subscribing and watching my channel, and hope to be posting more frequently moving forward.